together here with our good friends, Marshall, Jim, and Eric, and we wanted to focus on, Jim, the initiative now that you're seeing is getting great traction across, I hope, the globe and starting here in the US. Could you take us through your 5-point plan and where we really stand right now?
Well, you know, Mark, when I started really taking a hard look at what was happening in the United States, I kept getting baffled because, you know, we were talking about trillions of dollars in fiscal stimulus. And, you know, putting on my World Bank hat, that's all we did. We talked about how to use fiscal and monetary tools to help countries develop. And so we were talking about these enormous measures, bazookas, the nuclear option, you know, fiscal measures and monetary policies that we'd never seen before. And yet we weren't addressing the core of the crisis. This was not fundamentally a financial crisis. It's fundamentally a public health crisis. And what we were seeing on the public health scene was everyone really sort of throwing their hands up. You know, we saw states that only had 1 or 2 cases and states that had no cases. And everyone was saying, oh, it's too late for contact tracing. It's too late to be aggressive. Now, to be fair, it reflected a chronic underinvestment in public health. So in 2018, for example, we spent $11,000 per person, for every person in the United States on medical care. And we spent $286 per person for public health issues. And public health, this has always been the case, that we spend nothing on public health and everything we spend on healthcare. So what's happened, I think, is the public health community has gotten beaten down a little bit. And so for some reason, even leaders in public health were saying it's too late for this, it's too late for that. And I couldn't believe it. And moreover, it reminded me of various projects that I had taken on in the past, things like drug-resistant tuberculosis in developing countries. And everyone in the public health community said it's too complicated, it's too difficult, you can't do it. HIV treatment in Africa, 25 million people in Africa living with HIV, and we had pills for that. It wasn't, there was no vaccine, but a pill in the morning and the pill in the evening could return them to almost normal life. And we said as a public health community, except for very few of us, not possible, you can't do it, it's too complicated. And I went around, I was at the World Health Organization at the time saying, you know, if we let 25 million people in Africa just die because we think it's inconvenient or complicated to provide a pill in the morning and a pill in the evening, we will forever be remembered as the generation that stood by while the genocide happened. And so we eventually won that argument, but it was hard. And so what I saw was that the public health community had given up too early. We should have stood up and said, no, wait. We have to have much more testing right now. We cannot give up on the contact tracing. We cannot give up on isolation and quarantine. We've got to stop the transmission of the virus. And so I started calling different people. I started saying, who should I talk to? And finally, some very wise people said, look, why don't you try to stand up a program in one state, and that example will have an impact on others. And so I called as many people as I could. And finally, Governor Charlie Baker from Massachusetts took my call. And what I said to him was, you know, everything we know about this virus, data coming out of China, my friends, you know, former colleagues and friends at the World Health Organization were telling me this as well. They were saying, you cannot just do social distancing because you'll stop the transmission between households. That's what social distancing does, but it doesn't stop the transmission within households. And the recommendation, and this is Marshall told me this, the recommendation in New York State, the hardest hit state, was that if you feel like you have symptoms and you might have COVID, you cannot get tested, stay at home, right? That was the actual, so in other words, we were in a situation where intrafamilial transmission was being facilitated. Right. So I started saying, we've got to change this, we got to do it somewhere. And then in talking with Governor Baker, he said, you know, it feels to me like we're sitting ducks, just waiting to see what this virus is do. I get this, let's go after it. And so that's what we needed. And now the program's been going for 2 weeks. We've had 35,000 applicants for the contact tracing jobs. We've hired about 1,000 of them. This is so complicated, but now we've got a system where there's a contact management program. It's linked to the state of Massachusetts system. We've worked through all the privacy laws. They're called the HIPAA laws. We've worked through them all so that now we can get the information as we need. Now, there's still a lot of challenges. People don't know enough about the program. Not everyone's answering the phone. But the point is, we're in the mode of problem solving, not sitting back worrying about what's this going to do. How long are we going to have to stay, in lockdown? Now, one of the things that I think brought everyone around was this realization that if we want to reduce the social distancing measures, we've got to have a program like this in place anyway, because the only way you can feel comfortable relaxing your social distancing is if you have a system that every time someone has symptoms, you go, you test them, you find out who their contacts are, you test all of those, you do isolation and quarantine so that any outbreak you stop. If you don't have that system in place, you open up the economy, and you're just going to have disasters everywhere. So an amazing amount of, I think, rethinking has happened. I think that the example of something actually happening in Massachusetts forced everybody to stop saying you can't do it, it's too late, because we were just doing it. And now I just did a session with, I think, 30 states and many municipalities and cities, hundreds of people online, where we explained the Massachusetts program and offered them our hand in partnership to work on this together.
Mm. What was the reception today? Did they find this an enabling factor? Because now everybody has a committee for getting back to work. Everybody's thinking about what's that next step.
Well, we just got off the call, so I don't know what the reception has been, but the questions were really very pointed. And the questions were like, how do we get this started? They were very practical questions. And so I think now people are far beyond thinking, should we do this? Can we do this? Now they're thinking about how do we do this? And that's exactly where we should be.
Mm-hmm. How can we as a business community support this next step in the race now that we have your plan?
Well, one of the things, Mark, that's been so interesting to me, and one of the things I talked about with business leaders generally, business leaders, and I'm a business person myself. We are just doing everything we can to keep the businesses we own afloat. We're making sure that they have the right amount of cash flow. We're trying to keep people safe. We are going all out in trying to keep our business going. And you see, again, ministers of finance, secretaries of the treasury are just, pulling out all the stops to do what they need to do for their businesses. And so what we need the business community to do is just absolutely insist that in the public health sphere, we do the same thing, right? We've spent $2 trillion, now maybe $2.5 trillion on propping up the economy. This is absolutely critical. I'm glad they did it. I'm completely for it. But very little so far on the public health response. And so I've been saying, why would you want to keep spending trillions and trillions of dollars on propping up an economy when the actual problem is the public health problem? Right. So I would love to see business leaders say, enough. We need to see as much intensity, as much effort, as we need the bazookas on public health. Right now it's bazookas on the economic front, squirt guns on the public health front. We need bazookas everywhere.
And this is where the return on investment here is incredible. I mean, if we had saved the capacity to execute on this plan back when we first started to learn about these things, it might have been just a few billion versus a few trillion, even on the public health side.
Exactly, Mark. And the countries that were prepared, that had had scares before, right, they said we're not going to let this happen again. So in Korea, in 2014, they had an outbreak of MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. That has a very high death rate, almost a 30% death rate. It doesn't transmit nearly as well as either SARS or COVID, but that scared them so much that they were ready. Australia, New Zealand have done really, really well because they've done the entire 5-step approach from the beginning. And now, what you're hearing out of New Zealand and Australia, that people are saying, yeah, but you can't do that elsewhere. Well, a very smart man who runs the epidemic response at WHO, Mike Ryan, a very good friend of mine. Mike said this to all the member states of the World Health Organization. He said, those of you who have a few cases, there's only one way to prevent from having a mountain of cases, and that's the 5-step program: social distancing, testing, contact tracing, isolation, and quarantine. Of course, you have to treat your people. And then he said, and for the countries that are standing on a mountain of cases, the only way down the mountain is exactly the same. You have to do those 5 things. And so, I think we've got that message now. I think that message is finally seeping into people's brains. But there's this different aspiration problem. That the aspiration of people who are used to dealing in billions and trillions of dollars and who have to make their businesses work or they die, that's one thing that you see in full force. And then you see in the public health community kind of getting used to the fact that there's 11,000 per person spent on medical care and 286 per person spent on public health. So we cannot let those kinds of dampened and beaten down aspirations determine our fate. We've got to rise our aspirations to meet the challenge, and this is a public health challenge.
It seems like a great way forward. Eric, you were going to comment, I think.
I was just on a ridge in New Jersey overlooking the city, and the city was treated to an overflight by the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, the Air Force Thunderbirds, who were flying over the city and doing their stunts to honor essential workers, healthcare workers, and all the people who are keeping the economy going while we shelter at home. And I thought, every war has its glorious heroes, the people in the front lines, people who you expect to turn to for help, people like you, Jim, Dr. Fauci, or the heads of the corporations. And then they have the foot soldiers. So Jim talked about the metaphor of wielding bazookas. There are people wielding the bazookas, but the people holding the line right now while we're trying to keep the disease at bay, while we get the treatments, while we get the ventilators, and while we get the vaccine online, are the riflemen. And those are the grocery clerks and the nurses. And I would submit they're also the small business owners. Now, it's kind of a cliche to refer to small business owners as heroes of the economy. And what people usually mean when they say that is that they create a lot of jobs and innovation. But what business owners are doing right now by keeping their company afloat is providing the leadership that is just not present at the highest reaches of government. I talk to a lot of small business owners in my job, and what I hear from them all the time after time, is this incredible concern for the welfare of their employees. So yeah, they have to worry about cash flow, but they're also, at the same time that they're applying for PPP loans and worrying about cash flow and days outstanding of sales and accounts receivable, they're also becoming sort of the entertainment cruise counselors, keeping their employees' spirits up. I've heard at least half a dozen tell me that they have called or emailed every single employee they have, not to say, are you on goal, but just to say, how are you doing? And that is, at a moment like this, I think, the essence of leadership. The fact that people don't necessarily need to know that you're riding in on a white horse, that you're solving all the problems. What they need to know is that somebody is in charge, and that somebody cares about them and cares about them at a fundamental level. That's why.
Well, what else do you think would be another key point that you want to make sure that this group takes away, Jim and Eric and Marshall, from the experiences that we've been having here in terms of dealing with a crisis, and all going either into solitary confinement or in small groups in place, depending on the small businesses, the entrepreneurs, spending on, in hoping to support and invest in our healthcare workers who are on the front line. What would we take away from a leadership standpoint that you've learned or experienced here?
Well, one quick thing, building on Eric's point, A lot of people told us with the contact tracing program, oh, this is another one that I love. You can't, it's too complicated, too difficult to do with people. You have to do it with apps, right? So I just get apps sent to me all the time, right? And it's people are very excited about their apps.
Yeah,
And they
mine
send
has a
them to
needle
me.
here, right? It just
Right. Well, they're very excited about their apps, and they basically tell me that it's my responsibility to integrate their app into our contact tracing program.
Mm.
But what we found out is that when we call people, when the people answer their phone, they're desperate to talk to folks. And so we thought the calls would be 10 to 15 minutes. They're 30 to 45 minutes. Our folks they go through a 3 to 5 day training program, and then they have to do sort of a practical training. But in that period, they know more about what's going on than just about anyone else. We connect them to other people. We find out it's one of the things that we're doing is just trying to combat the inequality of outcomes in COVID. So we find out if they need food, we find out if they need a place to stay in order to be safe, keep their family safe. In doing all of that, that human touch has been just critical. And so I can't say enough times, what Eric said is that for leaders, reaching out to your people. I think that there are people who, after this amount of time, are feeling, lonely, isolated, unsure. That human touch, even if it has to be through video conference or telephone call, it is so important.
Dr. Jim, in our own way, Mark and Eric and I, we are able to reach X number of people, and they can reach people. And I'm a believer in what you're doing, because to me, the counter argument makes no sense. Why do we object to spending even tens of billions of dollars when we're already spending trillions of dollars, which, by the way, unless I'm missing something, if we don't do what you're saying, we have to repeat it again and maybe again and again. Why are we doing this? Just from in a small business point of view, you're not going to help people. They go back to work and they have to go back again and again and close down. That's even worse. What can we do, or the people that we talk to do, or the people that hear you do? What can we do to help you communicate the message to others?
Well, the most important thing is, and especially for business leaders, we simply have to demand that governors, the federal government, put these programs in place. Go after the virus, get aggressive, do whatever it takes to chase down the virus. And again, my 5-point program is nothing new. It's just the standard public health approach. And now you're seeing and hearing more people coming out and saying it's the standard public health approach. It's starting from a huge, base of cases, much larger than anyone would like.
Yeah.
Why would you give up on that? It's the same. It goes back to the 99.99% of the public health community in the early 2000s told us that it was impossible to treat HIV in Africa. And luckily, one person didn't buy it. That was George W. Bush. And
Right.
President Bush, in a move that was completely unexpected by most of us, said, no, this is a moral imperative. We are going to treat people in Africa with HIV. So the argument, he stopped the argument. We got about the business of doing it. And now I think 25 million people, 22 or 23 million people are on treatment for HIV in Africa. They're living now, they otherwise would not have. And it's that kind of a moment where people just have to stop thinking about all the reasons not to do something, all the reasons why something is difficult, and understand that we've got no choice but to do this. And the sooner we start, the better. I think that there has to be a demand, and we have to be very wary of so-called experts who tell us that something can't be done. We're going to show in Massachusetts that it can be done, and that example, I think, will, I hope, finally stop the naysaying.
Eric, you're on the front line with people who believe fundamentally in the principle that Jim is talking about, that what is impossible can be done, that there is this entrepreneurial spirit that is actually taunted by and encouraged by the impossible. And especially when the stakes are so great. What would be your insight in terms of what we can, learn from the small businesses?
Look, one of the things I'll take away from this is not just that the difficult work is not impossible, and you have to embrace the difficult work, whether it means the hard work of actually doing a medical test for vaccines and not leaping to magical thinking about cures, but also that you have to be clear-eyed about the risk. We had our chances. We had 2 months of chances to prepare for this.
Right.
And somehow, as a nation, we felt like if we just turned a blind eye, ignored the data, that the problem would go away. That's true in business too. You have to be absolutely clear about what is happening in your business right now. And I know, speaking for myself and from the people that I talk to all the time at Inc. and Fast Company, it's really tempting to just think, it's not as bad. It's not that bad. And yet you only make it worse if you don't embrace the tough decisions that you have to make and be clear-eyed about where your business really is.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, that means you first have to concentrate on the cash. You then have to concentrate on making sure that your people are okay, because when you get to the other side of this, those are the people who are going to be carrying you, and you want to look back on this as an experience that made you stronger and that enhanced your reputation as a business and as a leader.
And who else would decide and help you find the way into the future if it wasn't your team and the people that you support? I love the work that you do, Eric, and it's really important because they are the unsung heroes, the small businesses that you represent so well. So thanks for having this conversation today.
No, thanks for inviting me, Mark. And Marshall, thank you as always.